Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to be talking about something that's got implications for really the entire world, especially for Europe and America. We're going to be talking about Russia's shadow fleet, which, I think most folks have heard about, in the context of sanctions evasion.
Right.
But there are some new developments that suggest it might be being used for something a lot more serious.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, initially it was kind of seen as this workaround, right?
Yeah.
A way for Russia to keep its oil flowing, despite all the sanctions. But it's grown significantly. I mean, we're talking over 1,000 vessels now.
Wow.
It's a massive fleet. And it's operating largely in secrecy. So it's raising a lot of concerns about what else they might be up to. And this incident in the Baltic Sea is a prime example.
Okay, so the shadow fleet, for anyone who's just joining us, and maybe even for our UPSC folks who are brushing up on international relations, it's basically this huge collection of ships, mostly older tankers that Russia is using to transport its oil. It's like a hidden network almost.
Yeah.
Intentionally obscured to avoid detection. But the question is, has this clandestine fleet taken on a more aggressive role?
Yeah, and that's where this Baltic Sea incident really comes into play. This region is already a hotbed of tension, strategically important. It's shallow, it's crisscrossed with all these vital cables and pipelines, think internet, energy, communication lifelines.
Right.
And it's easily accessible to Russia, so it makes it kind of a prime location for them to exert influence.
And that's where we have the Eagle S, this oil tanker that was suspected of cutting those crucial undersea cables that were carrying electricity between Finland and Estonia.
Right.
And it really begs the question, was this intentional sabotage? Was this just an accident?
Yeah, and what's really interesting about the Eagle S is it kind of checks all the boxes for a classic shadow fleet vessel. It's old, it's changed hands multiple times recently, it lacks standard insurance, and get this, it's flagged to the Cook Islands.
Oh, wow.
A place that's known for its very relaxed oversight.
Right.
And to top it all off, it failed a safety inspection with 24 defects.
Oh, my gosh.
I mean, this thing is practically a maritime mystery wrapped in red flags.
Yeah, you almost wonder if, the cable cutting was just an accident because the ship was in such bad condition.
Right.
But seriously, the strategic implications of something like this are huge, right? This isn't just about some lights flickering out.
Right.
It's about disrupting essential services, sowing chaos.
Yeah.
Creating a sense of vulnerability.
Exactly. I mean, it's a way to kind of disrupt and destabilize the region without resorting to outright military action.
Right.
And the reactions have been pretty swift. I mean, Finland boarded the Eagle S for investigation.
Right.
NATO's increasing its presence in the Baltic Sea. Nobody's taking this lightly.
With 1,000 ships, this shadow fleet must be an absolute logistical nightmare for Russia to manage.
Yeah.
Are they even able to keep track of all these vessels?
It's a good question. I mean, the size of it definitely provides cover and plausible deniability. But it also presents this huge control problem. Could some actors within this fleet be acting independently, pursuing their own agendas?
Right.
Or is this all part of a coordinated strategy from the top? It's hard to say.
And how does this incident tie into the idea of hybrid warfare, something we hear a lot about these days?
Well, hybrid warfare is all about blurring the lines, right, between conventional military action and these more non-traditional tactics. So think cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, economic pressure, and now potentially using commercial ships for sabotage. It's about creating ambiguity, making it difficult to pinpoint blame, and just keeping your opponents guessing.
So it's a way to escalate the conflict without actually triggering a full-blown military response.
Exactly. It's kind of a way to test the waters, so to speak, while still maintaining a level of plausible deniability.
And it sounds like the Baltic Sea, with its critical infrastructure and its proximity to NATO members, it makes it the perfect testing ground for these tactics.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a high-stakes game they're playing, and the potential consequences are significant.
So this incident with the Eagle S, it's just a one-off? Or is it a sign of things to come?
Well, to understand that, I think we need to look at the bigger picture, right? The evolution of this shadow fleet from a few hundred vessels to over 1,000, it's a testament to Russia's adaptability and their determination.
Right.
It shows that they're willing to go to great lengths to keep funding the war in Ukraine.
Right.
And to find new ways to exert pressure on the West.
So they created a problem with the sanctions, and then they weaponized the solution.
It's kind of ingenious in a twisted way.
Yeah.
It highlights their resourcefulness, but it also raises the question of what's the end game here?
Right.
Is this just about sanctions evasion,
Right.
or is there a more aggressive agenda at play?
And that brings us to some unsettling parallels. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, remember the Nord Stream pipeline explosions
Right.
and other instances of unexplained cable damage in the Baltic Sea? I mean, while we can't definitively link those events to the Shadow Fleet, the possibility is certainly there.
Yeah, I mean, this fleet provides a convenient cover for such operations, right?
Right.
A way to disrupt chaos without a clear declaration of war.
Okay, so let's connect the dots here for our listeners, especially those who are, following international relations closely, maybe even those prepping for the UPSC exams. We've got this massive Shadow Fleet. We've got a suspicious incident with a cable-cutting vessel. We've got a history of similar events in the Baltic Sea. What are the potential motivations behind this? And what does it mean for the region and the world?
Well, from Russia's perspective, disrupting critical infrastructure, it achieves several goals, right? It weakens economies.
Right.
It creates tension between Western allies.
Yeah.
And it projects this image of strength and unpredictability. It's a way to kind of say, hey, we're still here. We're still a force to be reckoned with.
So it's a psychological game as much as a physical one?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They're aiming to instill doubt and fear, not just cut off electricity or internet access.
And what's particularly concerning is that the implications of this Shadow Fleet and its potential for sabotage, they extend far beyond the Baltic Sea. Right? I mean, this raises questions of the vulnerability of critical infrastructure worldwide.
Exactly.
Particularly those undersea cables that are so vital to global communication and to our financial systems.
I mean, think about it, right? We're so reliant on these undersea cables for everything. It's how we communicate. It's how we do business.
Right.
And it's all very vulnerable.
This incident with the Eagle S, it really underscores how interconnected our world is. What happens in one region can have ripple effects across the globe.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder, have we been too focused on the economic aspects of the Shadow Fleet,
Yeah.
the sanctions busting,
Right.
and not paying enough attention to its potential for disruption and sabotage?
Yeah. Perhaps we've been so focused on what we knew that we've overlooked the potential for what we don't know.
Yeah.
The things we didn't even know to worry about.
It's a classic case of being blindsided by something that we thought we understood. And now the question is, how do we respond to this evolving threat?
Right. What steps can we take to protect critical infrastructure, especially when we're dealing with such a vast and elusive fleet? And what are the global implications of this shift in maritime security? Well, we'll be diving deeper into those questions right after this.
Stay with us.
Yeah, it's a multifaceted challenge for sure. I mean, we're essentially playing a game of cat and mouse on a global scale,
Right.
trying to anticipate and safeguard against a threat that's constantly evolving.
So where do we even begin? What are some of the strategies that are being considered to counter this new breed of maritime threat?
Well, first and foremost, I think we need to know what we're dealing with.
Right.
Enhanced surveillance and monitoring are absolutely crucial. We need to know where these vessels are, what they're doing, who's controlling them.
Mm-hmm.
So that means investing in maritime domain awareness, sharing intelligence between allies, and even deploying new technologies like underwater sensors to detect any suspicious activity. So it's about shining a light on these shadowy operations, making it harder for them to operate undetected. But isn't the vastness of the ocean a major obstacle here? I mean, how do you effectively monitor such a massive area?
Yeah, it's a huge undertaking, no doubt about it. But technology is advancing rapidly. We're seeing the development of autonomous underwater drones, sophisticated sonar systems, and even satellite imagery that can track ship movements with remarkable precision.
So it sounds like we're entering a new era of underwater espionage almost.
In a way, yes. But it's not just about seeing them, it's about deterring them, right? We need to make it clear that these actions have consequences.
Right.
So that means strengthening security around critical infrastructure, physical barriers, increased patrols, underwater drones to monitor pipelines and cables, you name it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But what about holding those responsible accountable? If they're operating under the cover of this shadow fleet, how do we even prove who's behind these acts of sabotage?
Yeah, that's where things get really tricky, but not impossible. International cooperation is key here. Working together, countries can track the ownership and operations of these vessels, identify those involved in illegal activities, and impose sanctions or even pursue legal action.
So even if we can't directly attribute every incident to a specific actor, we can create a web of pressure, making it riskier and less appealing for them to engage in this kind of behavior.
Exactly. It's about establishing a precedent, sending a clear message that these actions won't be tolerated. And that's where organizations like the International Maritime Organization, the IMO, come in. They're working on updating guidelines for ship security, promoting information sharing between member states, and developing best practices for protecting critical infrastructure.
You mentioned Norway earlier and how they've been particularly proactive in protecting their offshore energy infrastructure. What can we learn from their approach? Are there any specific technologies or strategies they've implemented that other countries could adopt?
Yeah, Norway's response has been quite comprehensive. They've significantly increased naval patrols, deployed Coast Guard vessels equipped with advanced underwater surveillance capabilities, and even incorporated their Air Force into monitoring activities around critical infrastructure. It's a multi-layered approach that combines technology, manpower, and a strong commitment to safeguarding their assets.
So they're not just relying on one solution, but taking a more holistic, integrated approach to maritime security.
Exactly. And they're not shy about sharing their knowledge and experience with other countries facing similar threats. They've been actively engaged in international forums and collaborations, advocating for greater awareness and cooperation in addressing this evolving challenge.
It seems like there's a growing consensus that this is a global issue that demands a global response. But is it enough? Can we realistically safeguard against these shadowy tactics, especially when dealing with a fleet of this size and a determined adversary?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. There's no silver bullet solution here. It's about adapting our security posture, being proactive rather than reactive, and acknowledging that there will always be a certain level of risk.
It sounds like we need a paradigm shift in how we approach maritime security. We can't just rely on traditional methods. We need to be more innovative, more adaptable, and more collaborative.
You hit the nail on the head. The Eagle-S incident, regardless of whether it's definitively proven to be sabotage, has exposed a vulnerability that can no longer be ignored. It's a wake-up call, urging us to be more vigilant, more prepared, and more resilient in the face of these evolving threats.
So how do we prepare for this new era of maritime security? What should we be paying attention to, particularly those of us interested in international relations, maybe even those studying for the UPSC exams?
I think one of the key takeaways here is that we need to stay informed and be aware of the potential for these hybrid tactics. Pay attention to any unusual activity involving commercial vessels, especially those with ties to Russia's shadow fleet.
So reading between the lines, so to speak, looking for those subtle indicators that something might be amiss.
Exactly. Don't just focus on the headlines, delve deeper, research the ownership structures of these vessels, their movement patterns, any past incidents or suspicious activities associated with them. It's about connecting the dots, recognizing patterns, and developing a deeper understanding of the actors and motivations at play.
It sounds like a fascinating, albeit slightly unnerving field of study, like a real-life maritime detective novel unfolding before our eyes.
In a way, yes, but it also highlights the importance of critical thinking and analysis in today's world. We're bombarded with information from all sides, and it's crucial to be able to sift through the noise, identify credible sources, and develop our own informed perspectives.
So it's not just about what's happening, but also about why it's happening and what the potential consequences could be.
Precisely. And that brings us back to the question we posed earlier. If the shadow fleet is indeed being used for sabotage, how should the West respond? What's the best course of action to deter further escalation?
And with tensions already running high, what are the chances of miscalculation or unintended consequences? Are we on the brink of a new kind of maritime conflict, one fought in the shadows and beneath the waves? We'll be tackling those questions and exploring the potential scenarios that could unfold right after this.
Okay, so we've laid out the challenge, the shadowy fleet, the potential for sabotage, and a whole lot of unknowns. So what are the possible responses? I mean, is there a way to actually de-escalate this situation, or are we headed for some kind of maritime standoff?
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, that's for sure. One wrong move could escalate things pretty rapidly.
Right.
But inaction also carries risks. I mean, it could embolden further aggression,
Yeah.
create a sense that these tactics are acceptable, even effective.
So what's the middle ground here? How do we deter Russia without provoking a larger conflict?
Well, I think clarity and resolve are key. The West needs to send a clear, unified message that using commercial vessels for sabotage will have serious consequences.
That could mean targeted sanctions against the individuals and companies, involved diplomatic pressure, condemnation on the international stage, basically making it clear that there's a price to pay for these actions.
So hitting them where it hurts, economically and reputationally, but wouldn't that risk Further retaliation from Russia? I mean, they're not exactly known for backing down.
Well, there's always a risk, but it's about weighing those risks against the potential consequences of inaction. Deterrence relies on making the costs of aggression outweigh the potential benefits.
Right.
And if we don't respond decisively, it could send the wrong signal.
Okay, and what about the defensive side of things? I mean, besides just monitoring and trying to catch them in the act,
Yeah.
are there ways to actually protect this critical infrastructure, make it harder to target?
Absolutely. We're seeing a lot of investment in new technologies and strategies. For example, some countries are experimenting with underwater drones that can patrol pipelines and cables, equipped with sensors to detect any tampering or unusual activity.
So like having robotic guards patrolling the seabed?
It does sound like something out of a sci-fi movie, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But the reality is that the technology is catching up to the imagination.
Wow.
We're also seeing advancements in sonar technology, making it easier to detect underwater intrusions, and the development of more resilient cables designed to withstand damage or tampering.
So it sounds like there's this whole new world of underwater security evolving
Exactly.
with its own set of challenges and innovations.
Absolutely. And it's not just about technology. Physical security measures are also crucial. Things like reinforcing pipelines, burying cables deeper, and establishing restricted zones around critical infrastructure.
It seems like this whole incident has really forced everyone to rethink their approach to maritime security. What was once considered this relatively low-risk domain is now a potential battleground.
It's a paradigm shift, that's for sure. And it's a reminder that security is not a static concept. It's a constant process of adaptation and evolution.
And what about the role of international organizations? Can they play a part in addressing this threat, or are we relying solely on individual nations to take action?
Organizations like the IMO are definitely stepping up their efforts. They're working on updating guidelines for ship security, promoting information sharing between member states, and developing best practices for protecting critical infrastructure.
So creating a framework for collective action. But isn't it difficult to enforce these guidelines, especially when you're dealing with countries that might not be so cooperative?
It's a challenge, no doubt, but international pressure can be a powerful tool. Naming and shaming countries that turn a blind eye to these activities, imposing sanctions, and even pursuing legal action through international courts. These are all levers that can be used to encourage compliance.
So a combination of carrots and sticks, but ultimately it relies on a willingness to cooperate, to recognize that this is a shared threat that requires a shared response.
Precisely. And that's where things get tricky because we're dealing with a world that's increasingly fractured,
Right.
with competing interests and agendas.
And with this shadow fleet operating in the shadows, it's hard to know what's really going on, who's calling the shots, and what their ultimate objectives are.
Yeah, which brings us back to the importance of staying informed, of being critical consumers of information, and of engaging in these thoughtful discussions about these complex issues.
Because ultimately, it's about more than just protecting cables and pipelines.
Right.
It's about preserving the stability and security of this interconnected world that we live in.
Exactly. And as we move forward, it's crucial to remember that this is a marathon, not a sprint. It requires the sustained commitment to vigilance, adaptation, and cooperation.
Well, this has been a truly eye-opening deep dive into a topic that I think a lot of people, myself included, were not fully aware of. It's a stark reminder that the world is changing and that the threats we face are becoming more complex and harder to define.
And it highlights the importance of understanding these issues not just for those in positions of power, but for all of us. Because ultimately, it's our collective security that's at stake.
Well said. And on that note, we'd like to thank you, our listeners, for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking.
And if you did, we encourage you to subscribe, like, and share this episode with others who might be interested. The more we spread awareness about these crucial issues, the better prepared we'll all be to face them head-on.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep exploring the depths of knowledge with us right here on The Deep Dive.